Hi, this is Congressman Tom Cole, the 4th District of Oklahoma. This is another one of our weekly congressional chats. This has been a very eventful week in Congress. And I like to think of it as a week when the President of the United States and the Speaker of the House came up to the Hill, rolled the dice, and crapped out. Quite frankly, they intended to try and force through a very poor infrastructure bill that is, to be fair, bipartisan. And I think they thought if the president made a personal plea and guaranteed that his reconciliation bill would pass in short order, that Democratic progressives would back off and would pass the infrastructure bill, give him a big victory as he left town and went to the G20 summit in Glasgow, Scotland. So the president literally put his prestige on the line. More importantly, the speaker put her prestige on the line for the fourth time. She's guaranteed a vote on the infrastructure bill multiple times and has never made the deadline. And she didn't make the deadline because she hadn't had the votes. And that's very uncharacteristic of Speaker Pelosi. So we had a lot of drama. We had a lot of cameras. We had a lot of press. We had a lot of talk, but we didn't get much action. And in my opinion, that's probably a good thing because neither of the bills that are under consideration are good bills, in my opinion. Let's talk about them each individually. The infrastructure bill is certainly the best of the two. The infrastructure bill, to be fair, is a bipartisan bill. 19 Republican senators voted for it, along with all 50 Democrats in the United States Senate. But neither of our senators from Oklahoma voted for it. And I think they were wise not to. They were wise for a couple of reasons. First of all, this bill is supposed to be fully paid for. When we do infrastructure bills, we usually finance them with user taxes, things like gasoline taxes or fees on airline tickets or fees to users at ports and waterways. According to the Congressional Budget Office, this particular bill, $1.2 trillion, the largest infrastructure bill in the history of the United States, is $400 billion, to be precise, $398 billion short of being paid for. So it's a huge addition to the national debt. Now you're going to get something for it. You're going to get some real infrastructure, some broadband, some much needed work. But again, if somebody tells you that a bill is going to pay for itself, it ought to pay for itself. In this case, it doesn't. Second, the bill was totally written in the Senate and not by the Committee of Jurisdiction. That is not by the Public Works Committee, where Senator Inhofe sits as a former chairman and has a great deal of influence. It was basically negotiated by a gang of senators on both sides of the aisle. It certainly took care of their states, but I doubt anybody around the negotiating table was thinking very seriously about the state of Oklahoma in the way that Senator Inhofe and Senator Langford do. They didn't have a chance to put any fingerprints on this bill. And frankly, in the House, we're simply going to pass whatever the Senate did. That's not the way the House of Representatives is supposed to work. We should write our own bill. Every member should have an opportunity to have an impact on that bill. Then we should go negotiate with the Senate. But this unusual process that the Senate came up with is basically jamming the House of Representatives. I have to tell you, I'm quite frankly astonished that Speaker Pelosi would surrender the prerogatives of the House like this, but I think she's so desperate for an accomplishment, and Democrats are so desperate to get something done, that subordinating the interests of every member of the House of Representatives, including their members of their own conference, is considered an acceptable thing to do. I simply don't agree. None of my colleagues in Oklahoma will agree. There won't be any votes out of Oklahoma for the infrastructure bill. The second bill, the reconciliation bill, which is actually what the liberals want, is very much a work in progress. It started out as a $6 trillion bill. That was sort of Bernie Sanders, it's an AOC's dream bill. They dropped it down to $3.5 trillion over a 10-year period when they got some pushback. And eventually, the president this week, in his negotiations with the Democratic Senate, has gotten it down supposedly to only $1.75 trillion by making lots of tough decisions. The reality is this bill is a bill of smoke and mirrors. That is what the Democrats did. They got rid of some programs, but mostly they just shortened the length of time that programs would be funded for. So when somebody tells you it's a $1.75 trillion bill over 10 years, that's true only if programs that are only funded for a year or two are allowed to lapse. and that's not the aim. If you actually kept all the programs in there and funded them fully over 10 years, the real cost of the bill, we think, is about $4.6 trillion. So again, I think the Democrats simply aren't leveling with the American people over the amount of taxes and debt that will be required to sustain these programs. Now, if you're doing serious legislation, you'd sit down, negotiate, fully fund it in the end, pick fewer things, more priorities. But this is a case where Democrats in both the House and the Senate, progressives, want everything. Um, and they're willing to gamble that they can force some of these things to be funded later, even if Republicans take over the House of Representatives in 2022, which they're likely to do. So it's very confusing legislatively. And what you should know is the infrastructure bill will probably pass at some point. The votes are there in both the House and the Senate. It's just simply being used as a lever or a weapon in an inter party warfare on the Democratic side of the aisle. Almost every Republican in the House will vote against the infrastructure bill. Not everyone, but almost everyone, and certainly everyone from Oklahoma. And every single Republican in the House and the Senate will vote against the reconciliation bill because we think higher taxes, bigger government, more regulation, an explosion of programs and entitlements is not the way toward economic prosperity. And I think there's some pretty convincing evidence in recent months that we're right. If you actually look at what's happening to our economy, you see a couple of things going on that should be deeply disturbing. The first, of course, every family sees every day when they go to the gas pump, when they go to the grocery store, the price of everything is going up. And it's going up because we've injected too much money in the economy through big government spending. You put a lot of money in the economy, then the price of everything moves up. Some people can stay ahead of that, usually the well-off, quite frankly. But for the average working person, their wages won't rise as fast as prices do. And we've already seen that. We've seen some pretty troubling statistics that suggest that every family has to pay about $175 a month more every month for what they bought last year in terms of food, staples, rent, mortgages, what have you. The second thing, of course, in addition to inflation that's concerning is a slowing growth rate in our economy. Every quarter that President Biden has been in office, the rate of growth in the economy has slowed. This quarter, which ended September 30th, it was predicted by economists we would have a growth rate of over 6%. Actually, we ended up with 2%. That means fewer jobs, less opportunity for the average American. And frankly, over time, it will lead to stagnating wages. So very concerning signs that Democratic policies of expanding the government, injecting a lot of money in the economy through excess spending, and of course increasing regulations, which Democrats do on a regular basis, whether it's energy regulations or consumer regulations or empowering the possibility of more lawsuits. Those type of things are, again, a drag on economic growth, and we've seen a plethora of that kind of action. So what do we have to look forward to in the weeks ahead? Well, first of all, in the short term, right now the Democratic Party is a circular firing squad. You have literally moderates versus progressives. You've got the White House and the Speaker's office versus the squad and groups like that. And right now they're going after one another. But sooner or later, I predict they will coalesce. And they'll have just enough votes to get the infrastructure bill through because, again, all it has to do is pass the House, and they've got a narrow majority there, and there'll be a few Republican votes for it. And then they will get some sort of reconciliation package. Now, that package will look better or sound better than what we heard about a few weeks ago. And a lot of people right now are hailing what Senator Joe Manchin and Senator Kirsten Sinema are doing. And frankly, I appreciate their efforts as well. But don't mistake the fact that what's going on here. They're making a bad bill better, but they're not making a bad bill good. At the end of the day, as I tell my colleagues, they're going to break your heart. They're going to vote for a deal. And if they do, it's going to have, well, it will be better than it would have been, there's going to be a lot of taxes, a lot of spending, and a lot of big government in it. Those are all the wrong, anecdotes for the problems that we have, for the difficulties that we're in right now. We need different kind of remedies. We need a smaller government, a leaner government, a government that empowers the private sector as opposed to making life more difficult for men and women and businesses and companies and corporations that actually create job and opportunity. And we certainly don't need to be expending the amounts of money that we are. We're literally just making the money up. The printing press is going wild in Washington, D.C., and you're seeing it at the pump and at the grocery store and in your rent every month. And sadly, that's going to continue. And in my opinion, and I would love to be wrong, I think it's going to get worse. So we're going to have some interesting battles in Washington, D.C. Again, I think this was a pretty bad week for the Speaker and the President, the Democratic majorities, but they'll get it right, and sooner or later some of this stuff will pass. It'll pass over Republican objections, and then we'll see whether or not it works. In my view, it won't. What we've already seen suggests that what's in the reconciliation package is simply not going to make life better for the American people as a whole over the long term. But again, that's what elections and that's what politics are about. That's what debates are about. Let me just end with this. We're also going to see next week some interesting elections around the country. They're very early forecasts of what could happen a year from November. Now, I would tell you, these elections are going to take place in pretty Democratic states, New Jersey and Virginia. But what happens there will give us some sign of where the American people are going. Right now, we know there's a lot of dissatisfaction with the Biden administration and certainly with the Democratic majorities in both the House and the Senate. Every poll you see has them what pollsters would call upside down or underwater. In other words, more people disapprove of the course the country's on and the policies the administration is pursuing than approve. And that sooner or later reflects at the ballot box. So we'll see what happens next Tuesday and see if the Republicans manage to pull off some victories in some unexpected places. Regardless, if they run closer in Democratic states than they have in the past, that's probably a good sign for them in the elections coming up. But the wrong policies and the wrong majority can create a lot of damage. And this particular majority, I would argue, is pursuing policies that are ultimately, if you're a conservative, counterproductive, and I think long-term will hurt the country. But we're going to be engaged in debate. We're going to try to make things better rather than worse, but certainly we don't intend to support things like a infrastructure bill that adds $400 billion to the national debt when the proponents tell us it's paid for. Nor are we going to vote for a reconciliation bill that increases taxes, regulation, and entitlement programs at a time when we're running record levels of deficit. So stay engaged, stay tuned, and we look forward to talking to you again next week.